Okay. We good, Todd? Excellent. Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Sammy Herbert. Sammy Herbert is currently the head of developer experience for 6pivot. If you've been following Sammy or 6pivot on any of the social medias, you'll see policy after policy that comes out that I'm constantly wowed by. So I'm really looking forward to Sammy talk tonight. But she's here to talk to us about building inclusion into organisations. So please give Sammy a warm welcome.
Thank you. So this is my image on the internet right now. Like, what a mad catfish, hey? So, this is my old headshot. I want to explain my hair. So this is my natural hair. And I think during the pandemic, you didn't go out that much. And so I thought I'd let my hair be natural. It did take me a while. So I've been straightening my hair for about over 18 years. And it was kind of like a psychological process of like embracing my own natural hair. But the way I did that was actually by consuming different content. So I think heavily in the 90s, you didn't see much curly hair kind of in a positive light. It's usually like disheveled. It's not really a professional look. And so over the pandemic, I kind of got my head together over it. And I was like, why don't I like curly hair? And so I think it was a lot about the content that I was consuming. And so I went out of my way to follow things on Instagram or on TikTok or on YouTube and watch these girls with curly hair, like slay curly hair. And slowly but surely, like my mental capacity around curly hair changed. And so now I'm hair curly. But that's my story. But that's what I look like on the internet. And like, I think I still look like that, but I think people get confused because my hair is like significantly different now. But this is my natural hair. It is confusing. I am Asian, but my dad's Irish. So that's what that's about. So a little bit of background for me. I work at 6pivot. We're a consultancy in the .NET space. And I manage and I look after roughly 30-ish developers. Like mentioned before, there's a lot of things that we do. We've won a lot of work. And we haven't been sharing it as of much lately because I've been doing the work. But I wanted to get around that and share it a bit more lately. But my background, I previously worked at Apple. It's probably where I built a lot of my behaviors and desire for around diversity, inclusion, and sustainability and accessibility and all of those good things. And then I've also had some experience around recruitment around the agency world and looking at what the market looks like. I've also consulted in a high-level area for big businesses all around Australia around what their inclusive practices were. So I've kind of seen how companies approach people from a grassroots level, but also from an executive level. So I've seen it here from a Brisbane local level. I have a good idea of what a lot of the companies here do in the Microsoft stack. As well as nationally. So I have a unique perspective around these things. And to be honest with you, all of them don't know what they're doing with their tech teams. And so I kind of wanted to talk a little more about that. A little bit more things that I do in my spare time when there isn't a pandemic is running Muses Code.js, which is one of Brisbane's biggest workshops around coding in JavaScript. We haven't done one for quite a while. For that volume of people to all be touching keyboards, it was a bit of a weird feeling. Who knows when that comfort level and insurances will allow that soon again. But to build on my team, so this is my team at 6pivot. It's our most recent photo together. And it was like the most recent time we could get together. We hadn't been together for about 2 years. Previous to that, this team has actually doubled in the last 2 to 3 years. So it was really about half this size previously. And so what that means culturally is really quite different, and how you manage that, I'll probably talk about a bit more. You can also see here, I had long hair. This was the photo that determined when I cut my hair. I felt like that was too long. It was getting weird girl long. So I cut it. And so this is very fresh, like this short hair. As I mentioned before, 6pivot as an organization has won like a silly amount of awards, like an almost embarrassing amount of awards. And having gone through the processes, I can say, out of them all, if you're ever going to go through an awards process to get benchmarked and to really find out where you are, I would really recommend this one here. So the Australian Financial Review's Best Places to Work, they're probably the most robust. They're backed by organizational psychologists. How they assess it is really, really top marks. And not only that, the feedback that you get, I really, really endorse. That's all I'm going to say about that. But those are the ones that we're going to continue to keep doing. So generally, There's always a big powwow about diversity inclusion. And before I dive into initiatives and strategies and what I think about it generally and what I see in the market, I probably want to give you a bit of background on D&I generally and what inclusion is and what I think it is. So I see it almost like a rope, and so diversity is like different things. It's a mix of different people within your organization. And this is what everybody talks about. Oh, we want diversity, yada, yada, yada. Not many people actually talk about the inclusion, actually getting them to work together. A lot of people are on diversity quotas or whatnot and just hiring all these people and just putting them in a pot and just hoping it'll mix. And you kind of see that isn't really working out. Diversity can be defined by a lot of different things. In this respect, I'm probably going to look at it from like a professional identity and a social identity. I've just realized by looking at this may not be accessible for people who have color blindness. And I usually check that because I have a team who are colorblind, so apologies. But there are different colors here. And professionally, it might be tenure, work experience, education, organization, and profession. These can also give you power or status within your organization. Also, you have things social-wise, which you kind of see a lot of talk about generally, social, political identities and whatnot. I would also expand that out to say introvert, extrovert, hobbies, interests. Diversity is a range of things, but in this context, I'm probably going to be referring to these things here. I think it's pretty important to talk about intersectionality when we talk about diversity. So what that means is ways different aspects of a person's identity can expose them to amplified discrimination. So an example of this. An Asian woman who is able-bodied, she may experience racial and gender bias, but not disability bias. Likewise, a white man who is gay and has a disability, he may experience sexual orientation and disability bias, but may not experience gender or racial bias. So this is when people are talking about intersectionality, this is kind of what they're referring about. And I think that's important to talk about because I think it's regularly just one thing when we're talking about diversity. You're usually talking about white women. And I really kind of want to open that up a little bit more because there are other areas. I want to talk about some stats in tech. This is a pretty common stat that you see. To be honest with you, I don't really know where people get it from. It's just the one that everybody uses. Everybody touts it, and I think when people define women in tech, they're defined. Going back here. I'm going to use stats from women in tech because they're the most commonly things that are measured. It's a bit harder to measure things from the ATO and whatnot. So for now, I'll be talking in this aspect about women, but again with intersectionality, you have women who have disabilities, women who have different races. And so I always see people about, always talking about women when it comes to diversity, but women are intersectional. It covers a lot of different aspects of diversity. But anyway, back to this 29%. Yeah, most people talk about it, and I do think that mostly covers all kinds of different women in tech, digital marketing, sales, X, Y, Z. That's not my specialty. My specialty is software developers. I really think that's where a lot of the importance is for what is moving forward in the digital community. And I think that it's very overlooked regularly, and women in tech sometimes co-ops women who code, where I think a lot more energy needs to go into women who code. So I did some digging around. Took me a hot minute. And I found that 18% of Australian software engineers are women, which is actually not too surprising considering that generally the rates of enrollment to, say, computer science courses are about 18%. So it's not as bad as I thought it might be. It's kind of on par. Now, what's concerning, and a very well-known statistic about women in tech generally, is that about 50% of women who take a tech role drop it by the age of 35. It's a really well-known stat. And once you started digging around in it, at first when that stat came out, it was almost unattributed. They couldn't understand why it was, and they kind of put it down to having families or whatnot. It's been debunked. So what was actually found, unfairness and mistreatment is the top reason why people in general leave technology. So this one here being 37% with unfairness and mistreatment, and then the next being like actively seeking a job opportunity and your standard things. But the overwhelming reason people majority leave their jobs is unfairness and mistreatment. Now that's not too surprising. I think that kind of works across the board. If you have a bad manager, you're typically going to leave your job. And most people leave their job because of a poor manager. So I did some more digging around. And these are more not recent stats from the ATO, but they're from 2019 to 2020. So I had a look around how many software engineers that we have in Australia. In Australia, we have about 11,000 women, and we have about 51,000 men. So that's where I got that 18% from. When you look at their median salaries, I prefer to look at salary because I think average kind of skews it in a weird way. It's about 87K for women and 110 for men. Pretty striking difference, and you could argue, well, there's a lot more men. So it's probably they're in more senior positions, like what's going on there. But that can maybe be explained away, right? I looked a little deeper. Oh, my apologies. I already highlighted these. So I looked at testers in software as well. It's about a similar amount of people in testing, 3,000 each. But you can note salary difference is a little bit different as well, about a 10K difference. I'm like, oh, I wonder why that is. It's the same number of people in that kind of work. Typically, men are just generally getting more. Maybe they're in more management positions or whatnot. And it's a male-dominated space. So that's kind of like, I'm not surprised, but it's nice to have data, right? So it's a male-dominated space, I'm thinking. Let's go to a female-dominated space. So I looked into nursing. So when it comes to nursing in Australia, there's only 17,000 nurses and 1,000 men, which is like, whoa, there's not that many. During this pandemic, it really made my heart bleed. Like, wow, our whole country relied on this amount of people. So there's significantly more women in nursing. But when I looked at their salaries, yeah, it's still significantly higher for men. So 65K for women and 82K for men in nursing. How can I explain that? So there's something going on here systemically, right? Significantly less men in a female-dominated field. They're obviously in higher positions because pay for pay or like for like salary, when people talk about the gender pay gap, it's not necessarily a junior software developer and another junior software developer male getting paid differently because that's kind of illegal. That's properly discrimination. It's usually they're getting promoted a bit more. And so I'm thinking, how is that happening? Like systemically, we seem to be endorsing men's skills than women. So I look into it a little bit more. And there's a really popular study out right now by Textio. And it kind of unpacks what I think is the core issue for what we see with some of our diversity issues generally in the world, but specifically in technology as well. So job performance feedback is heavily biased. And Textio found that women are 11 times more likely to be described as abrasive. Women receive 22% more feedback about their personality than men do. And people under 40 report being described as ambitious 2.5 times as often people who are 40 and older. They also found that Asian people get more feedback than any other race, 25% more than white people, and black men get the least feedback of all. And black women receive nearly 9 times as much feedback that's not actionable compared to white men under 40. Does any of that surprise you? Right. So I think we all kind of know these sentiments around unconscious biases, but I think it's nice to know where that might actually, like how that gets there in the system. And so once you understand these things, you can start working on them. The thing about unconscious biases, they are unconscious. It's a hard thing to know, but having information that helps you remember that when somebody's making a review or a comment or feedback about somebody's performance and it's not actually tangible and it's more based on their behavior than their actual work items, you might remember that next time that you see that in your workplace. So the cost. So we generally have this kind of sentiment in our society. And so there's some pretty famous blunders, and which maybe you've probably already heard of, right? So there's a really well-known one where people are washing hands and you put your hand under a soap dispenser. Whenever a light-skinned hand went under, soap came out no problem. Whenever it was a dark-skinned one, no soap came out at all. And so this is more around, say, recognition. So the people who built that just didn't consider what that might mean for people of different skin tones. It was coined as a racist hand dispenser and all that, and it was really, really embarrassing for that company. And that is literally a lack of diversity in that team, or even maybe worse, lack of diversity of thought. Maybe there were team members who had that idea and weren't able to get it through the door. And we'll talk about psychological safety and all those things later. There's also a pretty famous example with Apple Health Kit. So when that first came out, in Apple Health, for all of you iPhone users, it measures like everything. And when they first launched it, it included, say, your diabetes, your heart, cardiovascular rate, everything that you could think when it first came out. They were excited and toting it, but they missed the menstrual cycle, like a core thing for 50% of the population. And it was a really embarrassing blunder. Like, all the internet really railed on Apple for forgetting that. So that entire engineering team and everybody involved with that project, you missed like a core universal thing that women measure every day. I think more recently, does anybody know about the kind of the scandal that happened at Basecamp the last couple of years? Yeah, there's so many blunders. Basecamp, yeah, it's a really interesting thing because we watched it happen in real time because they put everything out publicly. But Basecamp were famous for having a great engineering team and a great culture. They put out books and everybody would really look to them for a great culture. And then almost overnight, it all crumbled with their team, and a third of their team departed. It was incredible to watch. And to be honest with you, it was completely avoidable. It was a diversity issue. Somebody brought to light a list of names that were inappropriate. And just the way they actioned it or dismissed it and retaliated against the team, at every escalation, that management team failed. They could have ended it way here, but they were stubborn and not listening to their people. And it was embarrassing. The whole community, everybody on Twitter knew about what was happening at Basecamp. The Verge wrote about them. There's multiple articles. But there have been very famous blunders, or where money is lost or embarrassment is had because of a lack of diversity. So what we know about diversity is, one, it's good for everybody, but I think inclusion is probably the most important part, because the backbone of diversity is actually diversity of thought. It's not about social political ideas or whatnot. It's actually about diversity of thought. And the people who have different ideas being able to come together and share them safely and innovate. And that's where generally you make a lot more money. So I think it's very well known and documented how much diversity increases business and it makes a lot of money. But I don't think many people talk directly about how you foster inclusion to get those ideas and to get them out of them. So, knowing that background, oh yeah, okay, better speed up. I knew all of this already. This was part of my background. I knew a lot of this context, and I'm joining a company that I want to have with this as the core of its backbone. And I'm very lucky at 6Pivot that leadership team, the CEO, is on board with it, very much endorses building her intent is to make 6Pivot the best place to work for developers. It's intended to be the best place. And so from the get-go, I had this strategy. And I'm going to share it with you, and you're welcome to take photos and share it. I don't mind. But this was my overall vision. So typically, people from, say, like a people and culture team will kind of have these three kind of areas that I wanted to work on. There's recruitment, experience, and then community were my focuses. Recruitment is a business need. It's a structural need for you to hire, make money, profit. It's a need, it's a pain, but you do need to have it. The experience is really where the heart is and how your people perform, how can they deliver. And community is just something a part of 6Pivot's value. So how do we give back? What is our legacy? When you think of 6Pivot, like, is it a positive thing? Did you learn something? How are we supporting our community? It's like deeply part of our DNA. So I see these top layer of things. So recruitment, like the overall structures of recruitment and your values, policies, and processes that we typically win a lot of awards for, I see those as structure, like infrastructure for your business. They're difficult things to get done. You have to write them. You have to have strategy and intention for every single one of those things. And if I had more time, I would take you through my mindset around those. But that was my general first thing to do, because Six Pivot, when I arrived, had no structure. They were kind of shooting from the hip. Lovely, beautiful people, but without structure. And because it was a small team, it kind of worked quite nice. So I implemented these things. I made sure that when it came to recruitment, that it was very inclusive, with the intent to be inclusive for everybody, not particularly women, all kinds of people, introverted people, people who have neurodiverse backgrounds, people who have disabilities, all of those types of things. Six Pivot always wants to do these things. Like, I think that's the heart of most companies. You always want your people to generally have a good experience, you know, be thriving, going through development and innovating. But what I found with Six Pivot is they were always leading with their heart, but they lacked structure. So I built that. So that's what I did probably for the first 2 years. And it's kind of painful work, to be honest with you. It's putting together policies. It's not fun. It's very wordy, and you have to find the boundaries and constraints of what you can work within. I implemented some really great policies like domestic violence leave, unlimited professional development. We have things called switcheroo. So if the public holiday doesn't align to you or your family or maybe your religious values, you can switch it for a day that does work for you. You can go through it. They're all publicly available on our website. But I went through and I implemented policies, structures, completely in mind to be inclusive. It took a long time. And I think we only started sharing it the last year or so, but we've had them for years. I just didn't get it out there because I was elbow deep doing the work. One of the things that I think is very overlooked is recruitment. I think it's not well done. I think if you're engaging with agency recruiters, do you know if your company engages with agency recruiters? Hands? Yeah, okay, so it's about half of you. Agency recruiters don't really care about you. They care about getting paid. And it's not their job to. That's their role that they play in the ecosystem. I work with agency recruiters with intention. So my recommendation, if you're going to engage with agency recruiters, engage with one in each city and have that one dedicated to you, so they're not spraying out to the whole community the same job over and over again. And explain to them your specs. What is it that you actually need and how you expect them to treat your candidates, because essentially that agency recruiter is an extension of your business. You want them to treat your candidates well, and have you even informed them well? Have you written your job description? Have you got your position description? Have you got the pathways and promotional pathways for that person? If you're letting agency recruiters speak on your behalf, I think already that's a big disservice, but a lot of people let that happen. I do talent pool a lot of people from diverse backgrounds. And it's something that I learned when I was consulting, that the most famous companies who were able to achieve really diverse teams were talent pooling. So maybe you come across somebody, it's not the right time, you hold them in a talent pool. You keep checking in with them maybe every 6, 12 months, but you have a talent pool. Gender neutral job ads is a given. There's tools that help you do that, things like Textio. And we also have blind code puzzle reviews. And this was contentious when I enforced it. So the team were like, why do they need to be blind? They either pass or they don't, you know? And I was like, yeah, I getcha. It's not for you. It's for the candidate. It's for the candidate to know that their name, so people generally who have different names already kind of have a bias against them, and they probably have lost many jobs because of it. And it's more for that person to know that they were graded fairly, that we had no idea who they were. And it's also really advantageous when it's a blind code puzzle, because everybody in the community knows each other. So they could be marking their own friend and they have no idea. So it's very, very neutral. We do that by having them, I open a private repo on GitHub, invite them to it, and I get them to change their Git config settings. It's pretty easy. That's a really simple thing to do. I really endorse it. Standard interview questions. So we have a Trello board, and it's a standardized system. And we have very open salary discussions. I have it off the bat. I'm quite proud of our recruitment process. I think it's kind of a gold system, but it continues to evolve. But I think that your recruitment process is likely shoving off incredible talent that you have no idea about, and nobody really looks at it properly. I'll give you a little insight to how we onboard. I won't spend too much time here. But onboarding somebody is really important. The first kind of 60, 90 days is definitive of if that person will stay with you. And by the time you've got them through that recruitment process, you want them to stay. It's in your interest to. So we put a big effort into onboarding. So we have this kind of nice, neat schedule. Notice that I start them at 10 a.m. because I want them to know that we have a flexible culture. I want you to be chill. No, we don't have those hard 9 a.m. starts. And then it's all kind of flexible. There's big gaps in their days. They meet a huge amount of the team. And they're generally kind of fun things. You have a buddy. We also have a organizational consultant who gives them a full-blown session on looking after themselves. Because if there's anything that I've learned about managing software developers, you guys can't look after yourselves. You will burn yourself out and you will work and you'll have anxiety. The majority of my job is just making sure that our developers look after themselves. I'll get more into that. But we work very heavily on mental health from the jump. Working overtime is unacceptable. It's very deeply written into our culture and asking for help. So that's kind of a rough idea on how we do that. But my general ethos is that I think the best developer experience is an inclusive one. And my argument for it is that I just think devs are super diverse in themselves. You've got a bunch of quirks. This is not legit, but kind of legit. I think developers are super creative problem solvers. They tend to not ask for help, or they do in non-obvious ways. I think what I have found is that managers who haven't previously worked with software developers can't hear when a dev needs help, and I find that very frustrating. So if a dev says something like, oh, yeah, no, I don't know if I can really do that, that's like a hard no. Like, that's it. So those communication skills, or managers being able to listen to that, I think is really important. I think developers need a lot of nurturing and care because I think devs are really often misunderstood. Not many people understand the kind of work that you do or like the businesses that you're involved with. Developers have some of the highest anxiety levels and depression levels out of any industry. So I think inclusion is a must in the developer community for you to thrive and to be able to do your work properly, because your work is misunderstood. You're always being pushed on. It's always rescoping. They have no idea what they're doing, and you're trying to be helpful. And the communication skills between both parties regularly miss. And so I think it's really important that developers are looked after. And that's why an inclusive strategy works the best in the developer community, because it fosters everybody. It fosters the introverts, the extroverts, the people who have neurodiversity, and all these different ways of how they work. I also think it's quite funny that devs don't regularly check their email or calendar. Like, it's like a known thing. I think and stakeholders really struggle with that. But it's mainly because you're doing like blocked out time dedicated to coding. So I think the way that devs work is different, and an inclusive strategy is the best one for you. And that just so happens symptomatically to allow diverse people in. And so I really kind of want to foster that a bit more. So since I built out all the structure in my first 2 years, I then wanted to really focus on an inclusive organization. I kind of like made this up in my head, what I think that looks like. I think structurally is some of the things that I did in the first few years, building out those structures and formalities, like inking it. So we have a flexible working culture. Oh, really? Like, what does it mean? Write it down. What are those boundaries? I want to really understand that. And then your culture. Culture is one of the hardest things to work on. Everybody's like, oh, work on your culture. What culture is a group of people and like an agreed way of behaviors in some respect. And some people might define that as just being nice and friendly and getting along. I define it a bit differently. I define it, I think culture, or a thriving culture, psychological safety is utmost number one importance, and how do you foster that? There's some great books on that. I do think the absolute backbone is a feedback culture. I cannot stress that enough, and I'll come back to this. And then an empathy and compassion culture. You can't just say that you do these things. These three things require training to do it well. You can have general feedback, but you're probably doing it in a harmful way. I do really recommend engaging with an organizational psychologist or getting a real trainer. If you want your team to thrive and really have innovative and diverse ideas and make more money, I really cannot stress that these three are the ones that you want to be working on. And then leadership. Leadership, really, to be honest with you, it's in the center because it drives everything. If your leadership aren't on board for these things, well, then you're going to be really significantly limited. The fun thing about working at 6pivot, my leadership team's on board, so I get to go the whole 9 yards. For everybody else, that might not be the case, and I'll have some options for you. But your leadership team actually drive pretty much everything. It's a very top-down culture. So I'm going to tell you loosely about some initiatives in our team, but it's like a lot, and each of them have their own strategies and implementation and intention behind them. And at another time, you can ask me about them, but the ones that I'm probably going to tell you about is probably the Readingmes. Everybody's super interested in generally. And there was one other, Good Vibes. It's a recognition culture. But what I did want to point out, we also have cartoon pictures, because not everybody likes their own image. And I also had that put in because we've been in a pandemic for a few years. And as new team joined, we didn't have a team picture, and it's really quite limiting or exclusive. So we do have our own team cartoon images, but you also find sometimes in Slack, people don't like their own image, and so having a cartoon to replace that, and that kind of in a cultural norm is a nice thing. It's not a necessary thing, it's just a nicety. But I think I wanted to point out, I think when it comes to inclusive culture, a lot of people think, oh, it's run by management and owned by management. I disagree. All the things in green are the initiatives run by our team. So our devs organized dev huddles. Dev huddles is devs connecting with each other every month, or it kind of rotates through the teams. And the intention is a social connection. Because we're a remote first team, we work flexibly, not everybody might know each other. And what they do is they just talk shop. It's like code club. It's just fun and social, and they're talking about code and the interesting things that they saw. Nobody else but devs are in it, and they run that themselves. Devs run our book club. The book club we're reading right now is on psychological safety, and everybody's really jazzed on it. And once a month, we get together and we talk about the book that we've all read. And that was fully initiated by devs. Donuts, initiated by devs. Slack tool introduces you to other team. And this is where you have social connections that aren't about code. I actually think that this is probably less impactful. I'm kind of finding that devs talking to each other about, the TV shows they like. They prefer to talk about code, generally. And they're the ones who really run our asynchronous comms. They'll be like, no, hello me, and all that type of jazz. They are the ones who implemented the help me channels. And they're the ones who implemented our ideas register. So our team have an ideas register, and then people get associated to champion in it, and they create their own little groups and they go champion that. So it might be improving something to do with one of our internal processes. But those are all run by devs. That means that you can do something similarly. The things in white, they are needing, say, managerial endorsement or systemic support, but devs can have their own ways of inclusion. You don't need management sign-off for everything. The thing that most people are interested in when I tell them is that we have company-wide Readmes. It works really well for us because these are kind of the categories or subheadings that we have, but we're a remote working team, and they're also on different projects. So when they roll on and roll off, that you might be working with a team they haven't worked with yet. And so we have all of our Readmes connected onto our Slack profiles. I try to use Slack the most, so you kind of have that down here. And it's probably like a really useful thing to get to know your team. You've also got things like you can enable your pronouns as well as an option in Slack. So these I found really useful, and I'll give you some insights as to what I found when we did them as a whole company. So literally everybody in the team has one. Some insights that I gained. We were pronouncing some people's names wrong. That was a really good first learn. They would kind of spell that out phonetically for you. We gained a better understanding in communication styles. People communicate differently, and they had it documented for us. For some people, English isn't their first language, and they need time to gather words. That's a really useful thing to know. Or some of us may be hard of hearing and need the camera turned on for lip reading. Not every team member knew that some of our team members have hearing difficulties or are deaf. Some people are newer to Slack, and that's generally non-developers. They're not really familiar with Slack, and they find it really intimidating. And so having that empathy around that. And then some of the team who've worked with each other for over 10 years learned some new things about their own friends. So I found the Readmes really, really useful. I also used it kind of strategically to share flexibility. So we are a high flexible team working remote. And so because flexibility was a category in there, everybody kind of put in what they did. And so what this does is for new team who are joining, they understand, because you can't see in a remote team how people work flexibly, but they can read how everybody else does. And I've normalized that culture. I think before the pandemic, people working flexibly was a real pain point. They found it really hard and they didn't quite trust it. I had to ban something called micro movements. Like they would type in to our movements channel, oh, I'm going to go get my hair cut. And I'm like, we don't need to know you're getting a haircut. It's assumed that we're working flexibly. You don't need to report. We're not Big Brother. Nobody's watching your keyboard strokes. There were some general trends. We found a few team were night owls, generally not doing meetings during the school pickups. And we also altered things like in our Slack away from keyboard. Like just as a general thing, you don't have to have a reason. You could just be away from keyboard. So a lot of these things are useful for new team onboarding to really embedding what your current culture is. Our team really run async. It was a good note to know that some people are on client laptops, so they're not always available. Some team prefer meetings before midday. And yeah, others don't really use their phone or their emails. So these are really nice ways to know how our team work, or when they go on leave, a lot of our team uninstall and go off grid. So having that transparency around how that works normalizes that culture, because it's one thing for management or somebody in leadership to tell people that's how it works, but a README, a company-wide one, shows everybody what that looks like. We have something called good vibes. It's our recognition culture. So what that means is when somebody wants to give a shout out to somebody, like you could do a standard shout out, but at 6Pivot, everybody kind of is given like $1,000 over a financial year, which turns into points. And so you have 1,000 points to distribute to people. And so if you want to distribute to somebody and, give them 50 points, it publicly gets shared and displayed in our general channel. So it would look something like this. So Shaw has given Megan 50 good points, good vibes points, and then there's the feedback and reason. And that's really embraced by the team. And it's a really good way to show recognition. Plus you get a little bit of dosh and you get to spend that in, say, Westfields or JB's or whatever gift card fun thing that you want to use. But I'd say that the READMEs and the good vibes cross-sectionally work really well with our team for cultural reasons, but also a recognition one and that general feeling of cohesion. I could go through all the other initiatives, but there are a lot. I think these are probably the ones that are more interesting. I appreciate that this requires organizational buy-in because it needs points, but you could implement something else that doesn't need money. But we found that really useful, and it really kind of picks up, especially for a remote team. What that means for us or what our results look like, yeah, it's like 6Pivot is an overly harmonious team. So from our engagement score, we use a tool called Culture Amp, which I highly recommend gathering feedback from your team to know what that pulse and feeling is. But yeah, compared to last year, we had an increase of 8 points. An increase of plus or minus 5 points is considered significant. So yeah, our team is like disgustingly happy. Yeah, it's actually a concern I have because I think when a team is overly harmonious, I'm cautious that they won't give like critical feedback. I actually think it's a slight problem. Like it makes me, I don't like it. But yeah, it's disgustingly positive. They're having a good time. If this last person accepts the job I offered her, we would have for this year hired, 57% of our new hires are people from diverse backgrounds. I'm pretty proud of that. That I didn't expect results like that for another 2 years for this kind of work. I want to be hiring and training and looking after diverse or different kinds of people, unlike other companies who might do it for quota reasons. I want to earn it. I want to do the right thing. With 6Pivot, our gender pay gap is 0.05%, so it's almost none, and that's because of the amount of women that we have in leadership positions. So these are some stats that I quite like. What I do differently. So I've been here about 3.5 years. There's a few things I do differently. Yeah. One, I would have not spent so much time on the structure. And everybody was kind of like teasing me internally for like working on all the policies and structures because it's such like a fun-loving team, but I really like structure. I actually wish that I had implemented culture first. So to change psychological safety, feedback, or compassion behaviors, to change like an organization's behaviors takes a minimum 18 months. So I feel like if I had like done that in parallel, you'd have that payoff now. Not that there's a problem, but I knew that feedback culture is the key. Like, I cannot stress enough the key to a thriving organization. And I didn't implement it when I first got there. I'm doing it now. So we're partnering now with an organizational psychologist. We're doing a whole scoping out and surveys and interviewing the team, and like a definitive strategy for what feedback at Six Pivot is going to look like, and how as an organization we'll hold it accountable. So I'm really looking forward to that, but I do wish that I did it 3 years ago, because the team has scaled. If I had done it when it was, say, 15 people, that culture would have been easier to foster, and then it would have been 30. I honestly don't know how companies scale and maintain their culture past, like, I think when you get to about 30, that's when you really need to like start honing in on some stuff. If you don't, that's fine. You can just be a normal organization. It's fine. It depends what your values are. But I do think around 30 is when it starts to get really real. So if I could go back in time, would have done feedback first. And to be honest with you, you can do it now in your own companies. You don't need an organizational psychologist to help you do this. You can simply, at the end of your meetings, debriefings, whatnot, or at the end of your project and your retrospectives, you seek feedback. The easiest thing is just to ask for feedback, and that fosters a psychological safe place to start sharing different ideas and innovating. But yeah, I did that when I first got there, and everyone's like, why do you keep asking for feedback? And so I kind of got shy and I stopped doing it. I wish I did continue doing it. But we're working on it now, and we're paying somebody a lot of money to help us, so whatever. What I wish someone told me when I started this journey: the higher you go, the more criticism, like open to criticism you are. I cannot express the amount of people who message strangers in the community, who message me on LinkedIn and Twitter, like, you could have done a better job. You're not doing it good. Yeah. And at first that used to really bum me out. But there's a quote from Brene Brown about being in the arena. And so I've kind of got this new boundary now. It's like, if you're not in the arena and you're not doing the work, I'm not really going to weigh your opinion very highly. It's a really difficult space I'm in. I don't have very many peers definitively working on what I work on, improving the developer experience, making it more inclusive and open for all kinds of people so they can thrive. I think there's a lot of opinions because people-based issues, everybody has an opinion on people-based issues, but whether or not you have the background experience to have a weighted opinion, I differ on that now as I've become more senior in the role. Yeah, I mentioned that I would have focused on culture first. I think that's like imperative. I don't know why I'm so structure focused. I really love structure. I do think that it's entirely about influence. So when it comes to changing things within an organization or people's minds, which a lot of you consultants would know, it's entirely about influencing individuals and parties. If there's anything that I've learned, so you can give somebody all the data and the stats as to why this is the right choice, but they will have their own personal biases as to why they don't want to do it. What moves and change the world is things like stories. So I could say to you, having a parental leave policy will attract and retain a significant amount or more women for you. It's proven by X amount statistic. And you'll be like, they're just trying to get more money from me. You're like, blah, 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 But if I tell you a story, if I tell you, I'll use me as an example. I am a 36-year-old married woman. I don't have any children yet, but I probably should. It's kind of running out of time. I am not changing jobs for a place that doesn't have parental leave or support somebody who will. I'm a senior point of my career. I am the primary breadwinner, and for me to have a child at this state of my career would be really vulnerable. So I need to be with an employer who has those capabilities. I get headhunted all the time, and I don't consider them unless they have a parental leave policy, because then I know that if you change jobs in the first year, you want to deliver value and do a good job and kind of knock their socks off, right? So like, what's the reality of actually having a baby? That is the thought process for a lot of senior women, and nobody really talks about it. But stories is like the humanity of some of those initiatives and what they mean is beyond the data points. It's beyond the statistics. It's you really want to bring, when you're moving toward diversity or inclusion, like the humanity of the change that you're trying to create. And I find that will influence stakeholders over time. It does take a lot of time. I think with Readingmes, I think I would really recommend that people endorse them on your own teams. You can do them on your own. The only preface I would have with it is it did give some people a bit of an existential crisis. And I didn't know that coming. I kind of did mine quite superficially. Other team did them very deeply. And so I had a lot of prompts in mind that I would probably reconsider now, but it did cause team to have some moments for some people. And I didn't know that was coming. So if you're going to implement Readmes, just know that for some people it can be quite confronting, be like, oh, how do I like feedback, or what's my communication? Or I think it was my quirks. My quirks was more to be something like, oh, I like sleeping in or whatnot. But some people are like, oh, are you trying to find out like my weaknesses? And I was like, no. But be conscious of that, because they might think that it's a trick in some respects. So make sure that your wording is very purposeful. And yeah, as I mentioned before, managing a high performing team that's harmonious. I manage really different issues. I make sure that this team don't overwork, that they're set up for success. Yeah, the majority of my job is just our dev team are incredible. They do the most incredible output. They get along really well. It's more them looking after themselves, so their mental health, their boundaries, and helping them enforce those. Generally with organizations, if you have organizational power, which you may or may not, so this might be a bit hyperbolic and I'm not going to get too much into this, but you need leadership training, you need a better HR team, and you've got to be in it for the long game. Driving an inclusive strategy isn't something that you do like in bits and bobs. You do it over years. I expected my inclusion strategy with 6pivot to be a minimum of 5 years before I saw any fruits of my labor. Like that was my long haul. If I was in a product, I would expect it to be about 2.5 or 3. It just depends on your business structure or model. I do find it really painful when people catfish like diversity. I'll talk about that in a bit. Or if you're hiring people from different backgrounds. So I'm not talking about like social political things here. I'm talking about, maybe you're like a top heavy team, you're all seniors, and you hire your first junior. That's a diverse person in your team. Their experience is different. Their status and power is very different. What is that for them? And you think they'll be okay, and you have not set up any structures to support and mentor them. Like you can't just plop people into a team. You really need to think about what your intention is there. And then tokenizing diverse people, I cannot stress enough how offensive that can be. But yeah, talking about baselines for inclusion, I think inclusion, if I'll use a junior for example, if a junior has a fair recruitment process, a good team, and they feel valued for the work they do, they like the project that they do, and they have a supportive manager that helps foster their career, that's everybody's kind of good employment, right? You'll stay there for years. And so I think that this is okay. And that is kind of what you're all striving for, is goodness and fairness for people in your team from any level, any background, to be able to have that. And typically, really, the bottom line really is who your manager is. Most people will leave jobs because of their manager. But if you want to go above and beyond like Faith does, that's my CEO. Her intention is to build one of the best places for developers to work, is then going that right to the end with inclusion. So really institutionalizing those structures, which I've been set out and doing, getting that culture solid and having formal input, and then having that leader lead from the top. You don't see that very often. It's very, very rare. And I don't expect companies to do that, to be honest with you. I think companies need to be honest with what they are. Some companies are startups, and you're just there to work your guts out and make money. Let's be real. So don't hire and be like, yeah, we're gonna give you your dreams. No, we're here to really, really bust our guts, and you're gonna be working at night and you're gonna be crying. I think be honest about what you are and set fair expectations for people know for what they are. I see a lot of companies maybe not honest with themselves about what they are. And what is your intention? Is your intention, to build a great big company and then to sell it? What does that look like? They're probably not focused on their culture. They're just trying to make it robust. But really, what is the business model? What is the constraints that you're in? And what levers can you realistically pull? And so for a majority of companies and teams, I'd say that they're down here. Not down, but there's nothing wrong with that. But I think when they start falsely hedging into these areas, it gets into a lack of transparency or dishonesty, to be honest with you. What can you do as a leader in a dev and a software development team? publicly supporting more learning about inclusion. So what does that look like? You could go back to your team and just simply type in your Slack channel, saw this chick talking about inclusion last night, it was dope. Like literally, just saying that you went, just taking up a tiny bit of space in your team, other team members notice that. And so if that team member has a difficult interaction with somebody, they might think to come to you for help. It's that visibility. Glue work, have you heard of it? Put your hand up. Okay, let's talk really quick about it. Glue work is a really famous talk by Tanya Riley, and it's talking about the people who do glue work. So maybe the people who do all the mentoring for you, all the documentation, all the testing, all the onboarding of new team members. So who are the software developers who do that in your team? It's not technical. It's not technical work, but it's important for the project to pop off. Typically, it's leaning generally toward women sometimes, and those people will then, if not women, it'll be somebody else in your team, but that glue work is getting lumped to this person. When it comes to promotion time, all the technical people are going to get promotions and pay increases, but the glue work is so important for the project to work together. I've actually had many people tell me how they've had to decline glue work just to stay technical, because you want to do those things. You can see that needs to be done, but it would take you off the tools and you might kind of be boxed into doing glue work. Identify who's doing the glue work in your team and value it, or share the glue work is really, really important thing to do. I think that more often than not, I do see that lump toward women, and then I see a lot of women in software development get pushed toward testing, business analyst roles, and they're no longer technical, and I'd say that's why that 50% stat is significant. So that's a really important thing. And when I say have zero tolerance for brilliant jerks, I mean it. Fire them. I love firing people. If your company doesn't fire people, there's something wrong with you. You should be letting go people. Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. If you're a peer, so maybe you're not in a leadership position, you have no power to do anything to help your teammates. You can speak up, you can make space for them. What that looks like is sponsoring somebody. So maybe you're seeing a junior person who maybe needs encouragement. It's not hard for you to type in or share, hey, I saw so-and-so do a really great job, well done. Like boost them up a bit, sponsor them. Or if somebody asks you a question that you might know, a peer who doesn't get as much recognition, go, hey, who'd be really good to ask this to? So-and-so. Your endorsement or passing that on is really, really a helpful behavior. And again, I can't stress enough how easy publicly supporting learning about inclusion is. You can just literally, oh, I saw this thing, it was so great. That is like 10 out of 10 for me. If I could get more of that, that'd be really great. Now, if you wanted to be a bit more tangible and a bit more organizational and structural, this is a bit chaotic, but come with me. You can ask your company what your gender pay gap is. Gender pay gap usually means that you don't have many women in leadership positions. A really famous Twitter bot went viral earlier this year for companies that would send out platitudes and say things like, in this organization, we're so happy for women to do X, Y, and Z. And then they would share that they had a 73% gender pay gap, which is enormous. So there's platitudes. And I actually think that's going to be coming to Australia soon, because we're going to have to be lodging that data publicly. So if you don't ask the question now, it's going to come forward in the future anyway. But yeah, how you get a gender pay gap is just the average earnings of your team. Your HR team know what that is. It's a pretty easy question to ask, but maybe a spicy one too. I do think you should know at least the baseline of what your team demographics are and capture feedback around it. I do recommend the tool Culture Amp. It's really, really great. If you don't have Culture Amp but you want to know what those survey questions are, just ping me. I'll send it to you. You can do it on SurveyMonkey. And then do you post inclusive job ads? There's a tool called Textio. I really endorse it, and it can kind of screen those job ads out for you. And I think a really important thing is, are your leave entitlements transparent? You can ask your employer about that. There's a hashtag on LinkedIn and Twitter, show us your leave, and you can use that as an example as to what other employers are doing to kind of help influence your stakeholder. What the future holds, I think the next 10 years is going to be super interesting. There is a report from the Tech Council Australia or something like that, that by 2030 they expect 1.2 more million jobs in the tech industry. What that comes down to with software developers is a little over 500K roles. So there's a whole initiative, government, Atlassian, Microsoft, everybody's really involved in it. And we're about to see a real injection into these roles. I think it's interesting because their goal is 2030. That kind of coincides with the Australian curriculum introduced coding in 2018. So by 2030, we'll start seeing those kids who kind of like started learning from, what's that app called, Scratch or something like that. But I think that the next 10 years, we're going to see a real difference in developers and the people who are coming in. And we'll kind of be the older generation. They're still here in 10 years' time. What I'm concerned about is with this massive injection, everybody always talks about getting people into tech. Nobody talks about fostering them and growing them and going further. And I really think that's probably going to be more our role. And I do think inclusive strategies is the future of that. And we need more training in it so that we can take in this influx and do it properly. Otherwise, we're just going to have these wild churns and then wild projects like Damien talks about just over and over again. I do think this draws me to the end of my talk, but this is the book that me and my team are reading at the moment. It's called The Fearless Organization. It's all about psychological safety. But this QR code, not too indifferent from how I trained my hair, so my mind around my hair, was just by consuming different content, right? And I think if you wanted to get more involved with inclusive ideas, you might need to start changing the content that you follow. So I have a link here that has a bunch of leaders in the Australian and as well as global space, as well as a bunch of articles and recommendations for books to read. But that generally rounds me out. I don't know if that is a very good talk about Six Pivot, but I hope that gives you a general idea. Also, this talk is a precursor. I'm giving a talk at NDC next week, and I'm really nervous about it. I've not spoken. This is my first time I've spoken to people in years, like 2 or 3 years. I think the last time I talked was at CTO school about the remote working thing. So if you have any feedback, please ping me on Twitter. Like, there's my handle down there, and be like, Sammy, I wish that you talked about this part more, or I wish that you didn't talk about this part so much. I'd be really keen to know so that I can make my NDC talk better. This is kind of like, yeah, my first run at this talk, so you're my guinea pigs, and I very much am thankful for .NET Space for allowing me to do this. But it's kind of nice because, yeah, the .NET Space is the actual one that I kind of care about most. I think out of all the other tech stacks, for me, .NET is the most interesting. I think a lot of people fall in love with like the JavaScripts and the startup space. But yeah, not that many people get into C# or .NET. It's not taught in universities. So I think it's very interesting how you get here, and then the projects, yeah, and also the .NET community I'm quite fond of. But that draws me to an end. Was there any questions? Yes, Ashley.
Thanks, Sammy. That was a really awesome talk.
Oh, thank you.
This could be a whole other talk.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear your opinion and advice on how to, so when you're interviewing a candidate, how do you conduct like an assessment of their ability in a way that's kind of respectful and also relevant and useful?
Oh, yeah. It takes a lot of experience, but it depends if you mean technical skills or soft skills.
Whatever's relevant to the job.
Yeah, it's experienced interviewers, but it's a whole team. I think I really like how we conduct our interviews. We actually close most of our candidates because of our interview process. Sometimes when they're like not keen to join us and they've gone through the technical, they're like, whoa, they really like it, and they also like the feedback that we give them. Yeah, it's an art, to be honest with you. It's not quite a science because it is people-based. I have evolved the recruitment process to be not so rigid. So I think a lot of companies are like, you have to do A, B, C, and there's no freedom with that. But that's just not how human beings work. If you have a code puzzle that takes someone like 4 hours to complete, that's not going to be useful for somebody who's acting in urgency. So maybe they have multiple job offers, or maybe they're going through a divorce, or maybe they get house. You have to approach recruitment like with the humanity that it deserves. Admittedly, I have a lot of space to do that at Six Pivot. The needs and requirements of Six Pivot, we only really onboard a few people a year. It's not that high. I don't have a huge volume, not like companies at scale. So I can do it at a really genuine and human-based pace. Sometimes for different candidates, I will change the order like dramatically. They might go do the final interview first and meet the CEO because they don't trust or know the company and they want to understand. And then the final step is that technical competency piece. but our devs really run that and they review that regularly. I think literally today there was a whole debate with the principal consulting team about how we could do that better. And now that we're widening our roles, so 6pivot used to only hire in the very high end. We now hire from developer, senior developer, so like intermediate, which is really lovely, and how we evolve that recruitment process. But yeah, it takes a lot. We'd have to have a proper consult about it. But like each company is different. I can't stress enough the things that I share and that I do at 6pivot. It's not to make you feel bad or like, oh, my company can't do that. Like, I fully appreciate that. 6pivot is quite an outlier, and it's why I love working there. I can really go the full length. Other companies, you have this much constraint to do some of those things. So you're going to probably do those at 100%, and you would pull different levers. And whenever companies approach me, to see how they could improve their developer experience or hiring experience or diversity in their team, they're all the same problem. It's always different. Every company has a different constraint. Sometimes it's an individual, the mindset of a person and mindset of a team, geographical layouts. Everything is different. And so all the levers, they're different for every team. So the things that I do at 6pivot doesn't necessarily apply to your companies, but this is what works for us right now. We're learning along the way. But yeah, I'm grateful for the experience. I'm having a really fun time doing it and kind of fleshing out my inclusion dreams.
A question. How do we foster inclusion in communities where you don't necessarily have someone who's sort of patrolling and not necessarily controlling?
Well, I think the Brisbane Developer Slack is a really great example. Yeah. Okay, I'll use the Brisbane Developer Slack as one area. I think, that's a concerning channel in some respect, but it has eased up in the last few years. There should be a defined code of conduct there, or treat it like a professional place, and there should be repercussions not too indifferent from, say, Twitch or something, or shadow banning, or there should be some of that. You can encourage people to use things like pronouns, or I think the best way is to lead by example. But I need to make it very clear. When I talk about inclusion, I'm not talking about rousing on people for saying, hey guys. I understand that's a legitimate concern for some things, but I'm not going to spend my time on that. I'm going to spend my time on systemic issues. I'm spending my time on things. I don't solve issues with people, I solve systems. I'm trying to break that down and lead by example. I can't change people who might be ignorant or have biases, but I can lead by example and I can foster people. I think for the diverse people that come through our interview process, a lot of them cry because it's the first time they feel seen. We're the first person to be like, hey, we think you're really talented, because all of their other employers have told them they're a bit shit or average. They've been made redundant. When they got pregnant, they got let go. They've had horrible experiences. And then our technical interview process is as fair can be. And we're like, hey, we think you're a senior developer. And they're like, no. And I'm like, yes, you are. Trust your skill set. And so we're encouraging that. But I think being encouraging, acknowledging if you feel comfortable, you probably have status or power in some way, and somebody else doesn't. So if we're talking about the Slack channel, a new person who enters that Slack channel, they're probably a little bit nervous. They don't know anyone. How do you be welcoming? That's not too indifferent from a company. But it's micro interactions. Like I was saying, the company can be on fire, but you and your team and your pod and your manager can just be having the best time. And sometimes that's all it is. It's just the people around you. It's literally your local community. So I don't think I can change the world. I can't. I'm just one individual, but I know I can change my local community. And so for me, it is 6pivot, right? That is my case study. But I try and I hope, and I know I should share more often. We have an insane amount of initiatives, but I've just been doing the work. But yeah, I want to, I think, lead by example and tell, we put our policies publicly on purpose. I want you to implement an unlimited domestic violence leave. I think you have no idea how many people are impacted by that. And it's not used in the fashion that you might think people use it. It's because maybe one of our own team members is supporting somebody else who's going through it. DV happens in really different ways. So yeah, 6pivot purposefully tries to share it. We don't hide it. And just lead by example. But I think it's very important not ever to look down on anybody else. Everybody's circumstances are different. 6pivot still has a lot to learn. We're by no means perfect, but we're trying our best. But I think yeah, if you're comfortable, acknowledge that you have some type of privilege and help somebody else who's less powerful. Like, it's just literally being a bit more human. And I think all being software developers, I imagine that a lot of your roles are just behind a computer, and seeking out those connections with each other to support each other is really helpful. But it's just little things like that. But yeah, I regularly have people message me on the Brisbane Dev Slack. I think some things that I see in that channel that are kind of harmful is people like flouting really large salaries that aren't realistic to the market, and it hurts people. Like, people will message me who's not from my own company and be like, oh, is that real? And I'm like, yeah, but it's like a US thing. But then that makes that person resent their job. Like, it's harmful. Like, you need to care about how your words impact other people, and what your circumstances might not be the circumstances of somebody else.
So I got a question on that. California's obviously just made it now required.
Salary bands, yeah, I deeply agree.
If you've got an issue with people sharing their salary, that's going to happen, right?
That's not what. Yeah, no. There's a specific person that flexes that over everyone else.
Yeah, but
on a regular basis.
But that's going to happen.
But it's not out of care or.
Sorry, I wasn't targeting that.
Yeah.
But my point was, right, I work at a company that has fairly high-paying salaries.
Yeah.
That is not the case for most companies in Brisbane. I'm very aware of that.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
But like, you'll also start to see that the number of places that are actually paying those salaries are not the norm, right? They're
That's
the
right.
outliers.
Yeah.
So while advertising those salaries, you might start seeing people that are getting paid those salaries. You might also see that actually the vast majority of the community are not at these $200,000-300,000 salaries.
And you're not running around telling individuals to quit their job on a daily basis.
But like, if we go back here, when it comes to salaries, like, the median salary is 110K in Australia. Median. That's of 51,000 people. Let's be respectful. Like, I do get that money, love that for you, but they are outliers, and only a certain amount of people can achieve that with that skill. I don't think so. I'm just conscious of that, and I know, like, I think when you post job ads, it should definitely have salaries, but it's more, it comes back to me like, what is the intention? Yeah.
The whole band?
Not yet. I will. Yes. But I do agree with it.
The other question is, you talked about interviewing for introverts. What do you do differently for that? Or what do you do to cater to that?
Yeah, so we've been tossing it up, and like, we're changing we're looking at evolving our interview process with either with or without a code puzzle, or what that looks like, and pair programming, that what that comfort level looks like. But a lot of it is around the temperament of our team. Our team are really highly inclusive, and when they know they've reached like a barrier, like, they're not going to push someone. Our interviewers are quite skilled in identifying where somebody's comfort levels are and not to push that, and like finding other areas. I think Quentin is probably my favorite. He's such like a beautiful thinker, and the way we identify talent is unique to the person. We do have a standardized process, but you got to also realize that they're also being interviewed generally by other introverts, so they're respectful of each other.
Probably have time for one more question if anyone's got anything. No? Well, thank you very much, Sammy. That was a fantastic presentation.